With Day Zero looming in Cape Town, it's not difficult to imagine Africa as an appropriate post-apocalyptic setting. With financial and environmental resources being scarce, in addition to corrupt political structures that have given way to some of the longest-running civil wars in modern history, it's difficult to imagine the trajectory of this continent being anything but apocalyptic. Author Nnedi Okorafor uses this political and physical landscape to construct her 2010 novel, Who Fears Death? In this story, our protagonist Onye is what's called in this society Iwu. She's a child born of rape who's expected to lead a life of violence. Through this, we're taken through her upbringing, where she and her mother were discriminated against because of Onye's conception. But also because of this conception, she was bestowed a set of abilities that she must learn to hone and control in order to defeat a threat that is out to destroy her. Now, there were several things that this book did very well, particularly the relationships that were set up. Onye's group of girlfriends that she encounters and develops lifelong friendships with all had distinct attributes and distinct characteristics that were really wonderful to see develop as the book progressed. Also, the romantic relationships that were explored in this book were done with a lot of restraint and a lot of respect and a lot of loyalty. One of the styles of relationships that were done particularly well was the relationship to oneself in the setting of severe otherness. Toward the middle end of the book, Onye and her traveling companions encounter a nomadic society in the middle of the desert. And these by far were the strongest chapters in the book. There's no place else in this story where the characters, the conflicts, the world and the movement of the book are as clear as they are here. And this made for some of the most dynamic storytelling in this book. I do want to commend Nnedi Okorafor for having the courage to talk about these very difficult issues and to talk about them and discuss them in the setting of science fiction, fantasy, and speculative fiction. At the time when this book was written, I don't think there were very many books that were integrating these issues into the literary world. Another thing that I really enjoyed about this book was when I put the Campbellian monomyth against it, it kind of hit all the important points. The call to action, the refusal of the call, atoning with the father, meeting with the goddess, all of these things that I do like to see in books. However, following the hero's journey does not a good book make, and the weaknesses that were present in this story were not enough to offset the aforementioned strengths. First off is pacing and repetition. The page distribution of this book was incredibly awkward. There were points where the story moved with warp speed, and then there were other areas where it just dragged and lingered. The result was a very strange feeling of this being one of the fastest moving, glacially slow books I've ever read. So much of the awkwardness of the pacing was due to repetition of plot points, primarily Onye's mother's rape. We were reminded of this event so many times, almost it felt like every 10 to 15 pages. And part of me was just like, you don't need to do it. We're still reading the same book. We know. And equally so, when Onye discovered that she had certain abilities, it was almost as though she needed to declare these abilities again every 10 to 15 pages, and it just got tiring. All the characters in this book were fairly engaging except for Onye. Her conflicts were the same at the end of the book that they were at the beginning of the book, and her personal growth just seemed stunted and inert. I found myself not caring very much about her at all. The use of technology and futuristic elements in this book were done very poorly. There wasn't a lot of technology used in this book, but what was present didn't seem to serve a purpose other than a reminder that it once existed. As an example of this, there was a device that sort of had a dual function. It served as a navigation tool, but also as a viewing device for Onye to watch a memory, an electronic memory, which didn't seem to make a whole lot of sense because with somebody with her ability, she should have been able to access that memory without having to use this antiquated piece of technology. There was another scene where Onye and her love interest were in a cave, and stuffed in this cave were a bunch of computers and computer parts. And again, it didn't really serve the narrative of the story that much. It just served to show that technology once existed in this society. And the ending was uninspired. There was no delivery on any of the objectives that had been set out at the beginning of the book, which made the whole story just feel pointless and wasted. And the solution that was offered for this world to continue was a lazy social cop-out. Unfortunately, the strengths of this book were severely overwhelmed by the weaknesses of this book. You had stodgy movement of story. You had a main character whose personal growth was static. You had an ending that, despite its desire to be hopeful, was just not viable. And then you had these environments in this world that were so muddled and so blandly described that it made you feel disoriented and beige. And that's really the best word I could come up with for this story. It was just beige. That said, I do want to read more of Okorafor's work. I'm interested to see if her storytelling has evolved and changed through the years. I'm also interested in seeking out some authors who do write science fiction, speculative fiction, or fantasy set in Africa. I think it would be good to get some different perspectives and vision of Africa's future. Let me know if you guys have read this book and what your thoughts are on it. I would be genuinely interested in knowing. Also, if you guys have any recommendations for science fiction, fantasy, or speculative fiction books that take place in Africa, please leave them down in the description box and I would be happy to check them out. Thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you next time. Bye.